I'm going to do a long video here to talk about trust administration in Florida, and I'm going to explain it using an example of a really interesting case that I had a few years ago that highlights all the good and especially the bad that happens in trust administration. And one of the common questions that's searched out there on the internet and in AI is, what are my rights under a trust? Dad died, left a trust, and I want to know what my rights are. Or maybe somebody's looking at establishing a trust and they're wondering, what are the things that I need to do or what are the things that I need to think about. Now, I'm going to disclose some things at the front end. I have a problem with trusts in a lot of times, in a lot of cases. There are a lot of lawyers out there selling trusts to people, revocable trust or irrevocable trust, to people that just don't need them. There are a lot of people that see some seminar online, some kind of nighttime commercial talking about trusts, and they think, hey, I'm going to go out and get one. Or, their buddy at the golf course had one, or another family member had one. And there's a little bit of I don't know if it's fear of missing out is the exact terminology, or the fact that when someone sees that their rich buddy has a trust or the other rich family member has a trust, they somehow think that, well, I should get a trust because, hey, my rich friend has one, and maybe I'll be part of that club if I get a trust. But that doesn't ask the question at the front end that needs to be asked is, do I even really need one? And in the vast majority of circumstances, you don't need a trust. It just adds layers of complexity and cost into an estate administration, and you just don't need it. And that's the person that has a homestead, could be $1 million homestead, could be a $500,000 homestead, but has a couple different accounts, $2, $3, $4 million, big stuff. In many cases, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to have a trust. You just get that stuff titled properly. Homestead passes to the wife. Homestead passes to the kid. The Raymond James accounts, payable on death on there, boom, it goes to them. You don't need it. One of the secrets about lawyers and estate administration and probate is if estate administration is done properly in a whole bunch of cases, you could put me out of business. You could put the probate attorney out of business by simply doing proper estate planning at the front end. But that's that little disclaimer right there. So I'm going to tell the story about a phone call that I got that illustrates all of the worst stuff of trust administration, and it goes like this. So I'm sitting in my office one day. It was a Friday. These calls always come in Friday about, 4:50, 4:55. And this dude calls in, and he's obviously very out of control. He's agitated. He's manic. He's just kind of bouncing all over the place. But I take the call, and one of the things about me that's different is I love taking these phone calls. A lot of these law offices you call into, you get answering services. A lot of these things are abroad right now, and sometimes they're not even in the office. But I've always had the phones ring directly in here, and when you call in here, you're usually talking to someone that I can hear out of the corner of my ear. And the reason I do that is in almost 30 years of doing this, I start to pick up on things. If I hear, one of the assistants that's talking to somebody and it's an interesting phone call, I can immediately say, hey, hold on a second, I want that phone call, and I'll pull it in and I'll take that phone call. And that's exactly what happened here. So I hear out of the corner of my ear something that sounds interesting, and I take this phone call. So the dude calls in and he says, my dad had millions and millions of dollars, and I've been abused now for a decade or more by this trustee. And many times this is not accurate. Many times the people are delusional. A lot of mental illness I run into in this world. But certain little nuggets of what this guy, even in his very agitated state, was saying were kind of ringing. They were kind of catching my attention. And one of the things I've learned as a lawyer, and I want to do a long video about this, is to listen to people. I was raised in a courthouse where the judges would pull pro se people that weren't represented by counsel, oftentimes uneducated, unsophisticated in academic ways, but would draw those people into the courtroom and would listen to them. And one of the things I learned about that is, even the guy that comes in, maybe he's not, quote, dressed appropriately. And again, maybe he's agitated. His hair is all out of control. He's pressured speech, and he's kind of popping off even at the judge. But what I learned from these good judges in the decades that I've been in there is number one, these people are entitled to respect. This is their courthouse. It's not the courthouse for the people with the fancy judges or the fancy shirts on. It's not the courthouse for the people with the fancy black dress on. We call it, the robes, the judges. I learned from these judges from the very earliest of my career that when the person comes into the courtroom, it's their courtroom. And we, as the people that live in there, the fancy people with the shirts and the robes and all that other stuff on, have a duty and obligation to serve them, to understand them, to meet them where they are. And it's something that I've taken heart, and it's proven to be one of the most valuable lessons in my whole legal career, to listen to people. But again, I think back to all those times when, some guy would be in a courtroom, agitated, popping off at the judge, not using, quote, proper English, maybe a few vulgarities or whatever thrown in there. Judges would listen to them. And I watched the way they would pull one nugget out, and in the middle of this guy's rant, they would say, hold on, Mr. Smith, you just said that this person did X, Y, and Z. Let's focus on that for a minute. And the judge would literally listen to what the guy was complaining about, and he would often find some little nugget in there about what this crazy person was saying that he wanted to focus on. And I learned that if you simply gave these people, popping off crazy people, an opportunity, oftentimes you could come away with something very valuable. But that was a long digression. Let's just get to this deal here. So the crazy guy calls in describing how his multimillionaire father had left this trust, and the trustee had been engaged in a pattern of more than a decade of abusing this crazy guy, of not handing out the money the way it was supposed to under the trust, of engaging in psychologically and emotionally manipulative behavior of abuse towards this guy. Now, I don't want to say that this guy was the black sheep of the family, but he was not the, quote, favored one of the children that were entitled to stuff under this trust. And that manifested itself in the way he was treated within the trust. Now, when Dad died, he had treated his children, fairly evenly or whatever else. But in the operation of the trust and how the stuff was being doled out, the trustee was very much disfavoring and acting contrary to the best interest of our guy here. And in these years, our guy would call his siblings and say, look, man, we're getting screwed here. Look, this trustee is abusing us. And look, this is wrong. And they would not really listen to him, or they would feel powerless. And so they just all laid back over a series of more than a decade and just kind of put up with it. Took what was being doled out to them by the trustee because they just felt that was the best they could do. That's all they could do. Well, in the middle of this ranting, the guy says to me, this trustee is this big shot. He is a lawyer, a named partner in this big firm, not in this state. It's out of the state. And again, that's kind of where this guy's authority came from. Again, his dad was a multimillionaire, and he had entrusted all this money, millions of dollars, into the power of this very, very well-educated, Ivy League, super experienced lawyer who had been doing sophisticated financial stuff for decades. And that's why the dad trusted him to manage this trust for his kids. Well, he tells me the guy's name, and as he's in the middle of ranting this thing, I said, let me just try and make a phone call here. So I did what I do in the middle of one of these interviews. I just kind of pushed the guy off to the side, put him on hold, and I called this guy just to see if this checks out at all. And I will never forget this to the day of my life. I said, hey, Mr. Jones, I got this guy here, and he's explaining all these things about this trust and about how, he's not getting what he needs and he doesn't feel like it's being administered appropriately. And I said one key thing. I said, he said that he has not yet received an accounting, a description of what's in the trust. And I will never forget this. The guy responds back to me, goes, you're goddamn right he hasn't received it, and he's not going to receive it. He's not entitled to it. And I went, whoa. All of a sudden, everything that my crazy guy over here was saying, all of a sudden, now you got my attention. Just wide on, 100%. My eyes are wide open. And that reminded me of that scene in A Few Good Men, right? When Tom Cruise is sitting there talking to Jack Nicholson, and he's got him up on stand, and he goes, isn't it true? Did you order the code red? And Nicholson looks at him and he says, you're goddamn right, I ordered the code red. It was one of those moments, right? So everything that this guy was saying about not getting accountings and not understanding what was in the trust, when I asked the trustee, and the trustee said, and again, I'll never forget it, yeah, he didn't get it, and he's not getting it because he's not entitled to it. That was the code red moment right there. Because, in fact, big shot, tall building, academic, Ivy League lawyer was dead wrong. My guy over here, who'd been for years saying that he was entitled to know what was in the trust, was in fact entitled to know absolutely everything about the trust because Florida law specifies exactly what it is that him and his sisters were entitled to in this trust. And Mr. Big Shot trustee over here had completely breached his responsibilities going back decades in not providing information about the trust. So this is a good point to break. I'm going to get into part 2 of this story to identify what the law was that our guy over here, our beneficiary, knew instinctively or had an idea about, and what Mr. Big Shot trustee attorney didn't know or recognize, and why that's so important.